Hi. Today's conversation and connection is with a fantastic individual. His name is Humberto Garcia. He was born and raised in San Felipe del Rio, Texas. He spent many years as a migrant farm worker before graduating high school, pursued his doctorate of jurisprudence, and while in law school, developed a strong interest in golf. He practiced law for almost 30 years and became a pro golfer in 2006. He is the author of Mustang Miracle, published in 2012, and Killhaven Farms, published in 2017. Now, we had a great privilege to sit down with him, and we had beautiful conversations, inspirational conversations, basically focusing on the migrant story, which is a great theme in literature. I can't wait for you to see this interview. So let's check it out. Well, hello, Humberto. How are you?
Doing fine, thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And you come from such an interesting background and have so many really cool experiences that I want to share with our audience. And I thought where we'd start is a common golden thread I observed in your work and your life, which was the migrant story. It's a literary genre. And I went out to the United Nations and I found a list that they had documented where they had common traits in all stories of migrancy. And I thought I'd read off this list and we could reflect on these things and how they showed up in your own life, in your literature. So there's two columns. I'll do the first column, love, kindness of strangers, ties or bonds over great distances, a sense of carrying multiple worlds during migration. This contrast of home versus destination, which inevitably requires courage. And there's always the goal of providing a better life, whether for the self or others or a combination of both. Now, the second column is a little darker. There's this sense of leaving something valuable behind. Hardship, struggle, a long, perilous journey, failure, fear. And this one I really want to touch on, a sense of invisibility in society. And then finally, this rootless sense. What I'd like to start out with those themes in mind, I'd like to go, let's talk about your roots, where you come from, what beauties and struggles, you experienced in your youth, family, cultural origins. Just let's start at the very beginning.
I began performing migrant labor work at the age of 5. There was my parents and 5 kids. And the word got to my parents that there was work in North Texas during the summers where they could earn some extra money during the off-school years, during the months, rather, the summer vacations from schools. And my father had some friends who had some friends in Hereford, Texas. Hereford, Texas, at that time was a small community south of Amarillo in the panhandle of Texas. And they grew potatoes, onions, cucumbers, carrots, all around Hereford. And there were crew leaders that would hire workers, such as my parents, to go and pick the potatoes primarily, pick the onions and cucumbers and carrots in exchange for getting paid, let's say 10 cents a sack full of.
Wow. Gosh.
And at 5 years old, my dad considered me physically able to at least help out. So we would leave after school, let out in May, travel up to Hereford, Texas. The crew leader would secure housing for us in some old army barracks initially.
So it was like
The
a
first-
commune setup almost, right? Like a
Yes.
camp. Yeah.
Yeah, like a camp, and there was no running water or inside facilities. The men would get together and they would dig a hole for the outhouse, a communal outhouse, and we would take a bath once a week in a tub with water that my mother would warm up in a gas stove, a little small gas, like it was like a camp stove, and that's what she would use to cook. We would get up very early in the morning, 3, 4 in the morning, to travel to the fields, and as soon as daylight broke, we would begin. With potatoes, we would stop around 10, maybe 11 when the sun got a little hot. And the reason for that is that potatoes get burned by the sun if they're exposed on over the ground. And I have to tell you, that is one of the most physical and hard type of labor.
So I want to ask you about a 5-year-old's perspective. Like, I'm sure there were joys with your family and love and things that balanced out that. And I would imagine that if a person was doing that at a very young age, may not have been as aware of just how laborious that was. I mean, it might have, I mean, was it perceived by you just to be the way life was? Or did you have an understanding that there were children out there that weren't laboring like that?
I never thought about it. I thought anybody who was anybody was in our circle, and we were all doing the same thing, physically working out on the fields, getting little money. We had minimal contact with people outside of the crew. When we went to the grocery store, or maybe we went to the theater on the weekend and that type of thing, we may have had some contact, but we tried to avoid having too much contact with the outside world because we knew we weren't accepted in that outside world.
So how old were you when your parents and you would have conversations about the outside world, you know? And what was your reaction as at that age?
It wasn't until I was probably in my teens, early teens, that I realized a lot of the things that were different outside of our world. And one of the examples I can give you is that when we were beginning our trip from the city of Del Rio up to Hereford, my mother would get up very in the morning, start frying some chicken and making some boiled eggs and some other stuff, and to pack a lunch. Along the way, we would stop at roadside parks to have a meal, to have some food during the trip. And at one time, I asked my parents why we always packed a lunch. Why didn't we just stop someplace and go in and eat, like in a restaurant? And I was told as well, because they're not going to serve us. If we don't provide our own food, we can't stop at a restaurant because they don't serve people like us. And wow. I slowly began to realize what a difference it made to us because we were brown. And then I started to be more conscious and more vigilant of the world, the surroundings, to look out for that type of treatment, that type of reaction from white people to seeing a family of brown people stop at a gas station or stop at a grocery store or a drive-in hamburger joint, that type of thing. And since then, I was more aware of the effects of the differences between the colors of our skins.
Now, when one says, accepting those differences, it baffles my mind, because I'm thinking at such a young age, I would be perplexed, right? Because when we opened and you were describing your environment, and that seemed like normal in your circle, and then to have this realization that, well, there's this division now, right? That obstacle. Did you sense that early realization, though? Did you fight against it? Did you find inside of you like, this isn't right, or I need to, or was it more of a reaction of self-preservation? Like, it's dangerous to combat discrimination. What were you thinking?
At that age, I was more accepting and more aware that people, if they did anything about it, suffered consequences. It wasn't until high school and college that I began to sense an outrage, more of a willingness to say, wait a minute, this is not acceptable. This has to change.